All right, class 6 continued. Um, these are elements of a panel, elements of a page. So this is examining the theory of how to control the flow of the page, walk your reader from panel to panel, and keep it clear that they exist in a certain environment. This can be fairly simple to do. And I pulled this example from Citizen Kane. So I took screenshots from the movie. If you haven't seen it, not a big deal. But this is an important scene, and I turned them into graphic novel pages. So let's start on page 1. So as we begin this particular scene, it's a two-page scene. Kane is walking into the newsroom. We know he's walking into the newsroom because the text on the door is reversed. So he's coming into this room. His body language and the lighting on the figure is slouched and dark, so that we get the sense that he's been defeated. He's not walking in victorious. He's not coming in to celebrate. He's walking in a defeated way. The reason that this scene plays that way is he has just financed and put on the opening performance of his girlfriend's opera debut. It didn't go well. She, in fact, bombed, and it's kind of shown that she's not as talented as he seemed to have thought that she was. So with this, um, it's an awkward situation because he owns the paper. Um, his subordinates, his editors, his editorial team is going to have to put out reviews of this play, and are they going to ravage it like they would if it was anybody else, or are they going to put a good spin on it because she is a friend of Kane? So as he's walking into the room, we have these characters speaking off panel. So when we take a balloon like this and we point the dialogue off of the panel, that means there are characters standing off screen that we can't see. So he's walking into a room with people in it who are having a conversation. The second panel, we pull back and we see Kane in the background. So we've established that he's come in through these doors. We see those doors again, so that's important. So we know that he's basically just moved a few feet. But we see who's talking, and it's a group of editors who are also in formal wear, so we know, or we can assume, that they also attended the opera. So with the dialogue, the chief editor says, are the reviews going to be enthusiastic? And the managing editor says, naturally. In the third panel, Kane has moved further still. He's getting closer to these editors. We still see the doors in the background. We still see Kane. He's no longer slouching, though, because now he's in public, and he's not going to admit defeat to his subordinates. But he speaks. They all turn and they regard him. Using a balloon with multiple pointers gives us a way to have multiple characters say the same thing at the same time. Could also be accomplished by doing multiple balloons, but that would give us a sense of confused dialogue. If they all say it in unison, it's the traditional way to do it. You can see that he's important enough that all of them in this circle have turned to face him coming in. Not only that, and again, speaking of body language, the characters have removed their hats. So the two main characters have taken off their top hats to walk towards him, and that's also indicative of his standing, that he is a powerful person. When a boss walks in, the subordinates tend to move towards them. That conveys to the reader that Kane is a very important person. So Kane walks in, he asks if the reviews are ready to go. They all tell him they're just waiting for one, and it's the one drama critic who is still in his office. So Kane asks who's writing it, he tells him, and Kane then heads towards this character's office. Now, we, again, carrying through, we saw Kane and the doors, 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 doors in these first 5 panels. In page 2, we no longer see the doors because he's moved out of that focus, but the doors are still over towards this way. But what we did is we included some of these characters here. So the guy in the derby hat and the guy with the kind of classy haircut and the mustache, they're now here. So we see that that's our carry through. So as our readers will understand what's going on, we keep an element from the previous panel in the panel that follows, and that lets them know this is where we're going. We get to the next panel. I cheated a little bit here because this character here, who is the main editor, he's the guy that's here, happens to be here and here at the same time. How's that possible? Well, if I was drawing this, I wouldn't have drawn him in there, but because I'm using screenshots, I had to borrow. But you still, essentially what I'm saying and what I'm trying to show is that you still want to have elements from the previous panel in the next one. Yes, the background virtually matches, and Kane has moved further in, walking into that office. That's important. It's also important to establish exactly where we are. If someone wasn't clear on how newspapers run, you might think these 5 or 6 editors standing here don't do anything. The reality is the workforce is here. These are the guys actually doing the work, writing the paper. It's also nighttime, it's late, so it's kind of a skeleton staff, but you can see from the details, there's scrap paper on the ground, desks are kind of messy, phones attached to the wall. It's a typical newspaper office. So Kane walks in, his chief editor calls to him as he goes, he ignores him. He turns back to the guy in the derby hat and he says that Kane and this writer have not spoken in over 2 years. And then he opts, as a good soldier does, to follow after his boss. So he's now heading towards that same office. So again, our carry through is the guy in the derby hat who's there, here, and here. And likely, if I were drawing this, I would sub out this character for the guy in the derby hat, just to reiterate. And is it dumbing it down? Not really. You just want to make sure that the reader is clear as to what action is happening and where it's happening. So when we get to the second set of pages, this is the ending of the scene. We see that the editor has walked into the office. We know he's going into this office because in the previous panel we saw him walking towards it. We see the writer's name on the door, and we see the writer who has passed out on his typewriter. There's an empty glass near this hand, and there's a half a liquor bottle right here. The editor walks in further to the office. He's looking off screen, he's looking off panel. We assume he's looking at Kane, and he's saying, "Sir, I didn't know he'd gone back to drinking." Kane's response is, "Read me what he wrote." And we know that he wrote something because we see a piece of paper in the typewriter. And again, the carry through in these 2 pages is going to be the liquor bottle. So that bottle is going to appear pretty much, in fact, I think just about every single panel. We have 2 where we skip, but for the most part, this bottle is going to be the thing that is the linchpin that holds our 2 pages together. So he says, "Read me what he has written," and the editor dutifully reads over the passed out critic's shoulder as to what's on the typewriter, and it's a negative review, basically saying that the woman has no talent and it was a mess. So basically they're going to write an honest review. He continues to read what's written there, and then he looks up to regard Kane, essentially saying, "Do you want me to continue? Should I keep reading this?" You know, he's not quite certain what Kane's reaction is going to be to this. There's no response. It's silent, and he goes back to reading it, and he gets to, "Of her acting, it is absolutely impossible to," and he stops. He hesitates. We indicate that he's hesitant by the 3 dots. Kane says, "Go on." We get to the second page. He says that's the end. He didn't finish his review. And again, as we're back here, which is almost the identical shot to this page here, we see Kane's body language. He's taking his hat off. He's not happy. We see the passed out writer. Again, we see the bottle. Now, there's a little trick with the bottle. That bottle's actually repositioned. It wouldn't fit in the frame if we actually shot this with a camera. It would not actually lay in that same place. In fact, it would be out of frame. But it's important that the reader understand this is still the same sequence that we're looking at before, so that's why that bottle plays such an important part. Kane reaches and pulls the review out of the typewriter. Again, we see the bottle, we see the empty glass, we see the editor's response, we see the passed out writer, and Kane looks at the note or looks at the review and he laughs, he smiles, and he continues what the editor said. Back here, he says, "Of her acting, it is absolutely impossible to, ... Kane continues, "Of her acting, it is absolutely impossible to write anything positive. It represents a new low in the American theater." The editor is surprised. He says, "It doesn't say that." He didn't finish. And Kane's response is, "It isn't here. I'm dictating to you." And Again, in this panel, we still see the bottle, we still see the writer, we still see the editor. We switch the camera so we see the editor's reaction. He's surprised. And Kane, again, off screen, says, "Get me a typewriter. I'm going to finish Mr. Leland's review." So he, very determined in that last panel, is going to write the bad review that Leland started. So despite the fact that this is someone who's close to him and he bankrolled the entire performance, he's going to do what he considers the admirable thing to do and write the truth for his newspaper. Right? But you can see element to element as we carry through, having that bottle as the key pin through this whole sequence in these 2 pages, and our other key pin items in the previous pages, in this case the doors, and in this case the other editors, we basically assure our reader that we're still in the same place, that we haven't jumped frame, that we haven't changed scene, and that's really important to do. Right? So that's a fundamental storytelling technique, is to use these little parts. Okay? All right. Any questions, we'll cover them in class live, and of course, as always, email me